Good evening, and welcome to this special event in support of Bradley Manning. My name is Lisa Simeone, and I'll be introducing each of our speakers tonight. We have a full lineup. I know most of you have come to hear David Coombs. It's his first public presentation since he has been the defense attorney for Bradley Manning, so I know many people have questions. And let me just get a few announcements out of the way right at the beginning. As always, please turn off your cell phones, your electronic gadgets, and those kinds of things, because this is being carried live on C-SPAN. It's also being carried live streamed at bradleymanning.org, and the audio is being carried live at pacifica.org. So again, please turn off your electric gadgets. We are going to take, after I give you the lineup of speakers, David Coombs will be taking some pre-approved questions from members of the press, and we'll do as many as we have time for. He will not be taking questions from members of the audience, but I'm sure you'll see that the press has asked a lot of the questions that you have on your mind as well. The speakers tonight will be Emma Cape, who's a member of the Bradley Manning Support Network, also Michael Ratner, who is President Emeritus of the Center for Constitutional Rights. We have several whistleblowers, Jesselyn Radak, Marcia Coleman-Adebayo, and of course, David Coombs will be speaking as well. The first hour is carried live on C-SPAN, and then we'll break. And then we'll come back 5 minutes later, and then we'll have the second round of speakers. So in the first half, it will be Emma Cape, Michael Ratner, and David Coombs. So I would now like to introduce the spokesperson for the Bradley Manning Support Network, and that is Emma Cape.
Back in May of 2010, news came out about Bradley Manning's arrest. He was then described as being the alleged source of what was called the collateral murder video released through WikiLeaks. A month prior to that, in April, the collateral murder video showed an Apache gunship 1 mile up in the air, laughing and making jokes as they killed 11 men, 2 of whom later turned out to be Reuters journalists. The video also revealed a war crime when the helicopter shot at a van coming to rescue a wounded man, severely wounding 2 children and killing their parents. Following Bradley's arrest, several U.S. communities rallied to his aid. Soldiers and veterans groups, such as Veterans for Peace, Courage to Resist, and the Iraq Veterans Against the War, as well as anti-war groups like Code Pink and anti-secrecy and government accountability groups, all rallied to form the Bradley Manning Support Network. The organization primarily responsible for raising money for Bradley's legal defense, as well as organizing public actions and public education and events such as this. The effort has grown worldwide, with 50 protests happening across 4 continents for the first day of Bradley's Article 32 arraignment last December. We have had such notable community leaders speak out in support of Bradley as the Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Nobel Peace Laureate, Pentagon Papers whistleblower Daniel Ellsberg, Congressman Dennis Kucinich, and the musicians Crosby, Stills, and Nash. The documents now attributed to Bradley by the U.S. military include the Afghan War Diary, the Iraq War logs, and the U.S. diplomatic cables, which include the Guantanamo case files. These documents have revealed numerous facts that have been kept secret from the American public, involving war crimes, civilian casualties, torture, and corporate influence on foreign policy. These documents have served as primary documents for thousands of articles in outlets such as the New York Times, Washington Post, and the UK Guardian. Collectively, they have provided Americans with an unparalleled window into the reality of international diplomacy. Last year, Amnesty International and the UK Guardian even saluted the role that the release of the U.S. diplomatic cables have played in aiding the Arab Spring's efforts to bring democracy to the Middle East. Members of the Bradley Manning Support Network played a role in stopping Bradley's unnecessarily harsh conditions at the Quantico brig in Virginia. Through protests, letter-writing campaigns, and public education, We helped prompt the investigation into his pretrial conditions by the UN Chief Investigator on Torture, Juan Mendez, as well as Congressman Dennis Kucinich. There was also a petition signed by 500,000 people worldwide that he be removed from these conditions. Since then, we've played a crucial role in attending every hearing, every hour of the day that Bradley has been in court to help document the proceedings on our website, bradleymanning.org. We believe that Bradley Manning's imprisonment represents part of a broader war on government whistleblowers, and that without attacking the problem of overclassification in the U.S., we cannot have informed democracy. We believe that a young man who risked everything to aid and educate the public about our government's own actions deserves not life in prison, but to be honored. In words attributed to Bradley, without information, you cannot make informed decisions as a public. Please join us by getting involved in our effort to promote truth, democracy, and fair treatment of pretrial prisoners. Go to bradleymanning.org to learn more about becoming part of our effort. Thank you.
That was Emma Cape, spokesperson from the Bradley Manning Support Network. We're next going to hear from lawyer Michael Ratner. He's president emeritus of the Center for Constitutional Rights. He represented Guantanamo detainees before the Supreme Court. He is the U.S. Attorney for Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. He's the author of several books on human rights, and he's co-host, if you're listening, people listening to Pacifica now probably know this, and those of you out there in the audience who listen to Pacifica might know him as the co-host of the radio show Law and Disorder on Pacifica, and he'll be speaking to us for about 15 minutes. So please welcome Michael Ratner.
Well, it's just remarkable to be here and see the work that the Support Committee for Bradley Manning has been able to do. You know, when they began, there was very little support, very little about Bradley Manning. And now, all of a sudden, really, due to their hard work, and they need more hard work by people, we are seeing a lot of support for Bradley Manning. Again, the website, bradleymanning.org. Go there and give them your support. You know, I spent a very, very rough 10 days recently. What I did was visit people who the United States is oppressing because of their truth-telling. Oppressing truth-tellers because it doesn't want the truth of the U.S., corruption, criminality, and hypocrisy coming out. I spent a few days at the Ecuadorian Embassy in London with Julian Assange, who, of course, has gotten political asylum but cannot leave that embassy. Otherwise, he will be taken, I am sure, to the United States, where he will very likely face a life sentence, if not worse, and certainly the conditions that Bradley Manning has had to live through. I then went to the bail hearing for Jeremy Hammond. Jeremy Hammond is the young man who allegedly revealed the Stratfor emails. I sat in a courtroom where a judge denied Jeremy Hammond denied him bail and said he is facing 39.5 years to life in prison. And then I went to the most devastating hearing of a day in a courtroom I have ever sat through, and that was when David Coombs examined Bradley Manning on the witness stand at Fort Meade. And I'll talk briefly about that. I want to say a couple of things. One is David Coombs has done an extraordinary job for Bradley Manning, and we should applaud that. I told David that I've seen the best lawyers in the country. Some of them founded my office. Bill Kunstler, Lenny Weinglass, Morty Stavis, and others. And David can certainly be credited as equal or better than those lawyers. It was really amazing to be in that courtroom. I also want to thank the journalists who've been covering the Bradley Manning case. And I'm sure I'm going to miss some, but I'm not going to say last names, so you can take whatever. Kevin, Alexa, Nathan, Adam, Chase, Josh. And you know one name you won't hear on that list? The New York Times. What you see there is journalists covering a trial that is very difficult to cover. And you don't see the major media covering that trial. You see these journalists go there every day, and it's hard because it's hard to hear sometimes. You get no access to any of the court documents except the defense documents, which David Coombs has been able to put up. None of the court orders, none of the motions filed, nothing. And I'm a lawyer, and I sit in that courtroom, and it seems like a completely secret proceeding to me because I can't understand what's going on, and I'm a lawyer. And the Center, as a result, the place where I work, the Center for Constitutional Rights, has brought a lawsuit on behalf of a number of these journalists to say, what is this? It's not a public trial. Shouldn't we have access to these court documents? And so far, through the military system, we have lost. I expect that ultimately we will win because the First Amendment does not stop at the door to Fort Manning or at the door to Bradley Manning's trial. But it's been they're extraordinary, and that's the only way we, who cannot go to every day of this trial, learn about that trial. As Emma said, we are covering really one of the most important trials probably in the last decades. This is a person, Bradley Manning, who allegedly released Cablegate, the Iraq war logs, the Afghan war logs. What we hear about in the press is really more character assassination of Bradley Manning than the results of what he allegedly did. Tunisia has thanked WikiLeaks for using the documents that Bradley Manning allegedly uploaded to them to begin the Arab Spring. The secret war that the United States is fighting in Yemen, brought out by these documents. And I could go on, but one thing you don't see in the press at all is the good, the truth that has come out of these documents. I've been to various hearings over the last few months where Bradley Manning has sat at the table with his lawyer. And you have to understand, if you haven't been there, you should get there. Because first you have to get yourself into Fort Meade. Then you get into a small, windowless courtroom where you can almost reach out and touch Bradley Manning sitting at the table. He's almost spoken, not at all. He just gets asked an occasional question. David Coombs, are you my lawyer, etc. Yes, 3 or 4 syllables at the most. This time, I went on Thursday in the hopes that I would actually hear Bradley Manning speak and take the witness stand. You walk into the courtroom, and the first thing that happens is the judge reads an order. This was an order about a potential guilty plea to some lower charges. The judge reads it quickly, mentions a lot of statutes, and you have your journalists scrambling to try and take notes, figure out the statutes and what's going on, because we can't even get a copy of the judge's order. After the judge does this, the first witness comes up, and it's a psychologist who's Walter Reed, but was one of the psychologists or psychiatrists who treated Bradley Manning. The essence of his testimony is pretty straightforward and pretty simple. It's that he did not think that Bradley Manning should be on suicide risk watch or on preventive injury watch, that he should not be treated as those people are treated, and even worse. And when he gave that recommendation repeatedly to the head of the brig at Quantico, when he gave that repeatedly, he was rebuffed, and Bradley Manning was kept in the conditions that most of you are familiar with. He was the first witness. Then there was another witness who was at Leavenworth, where Bradley Manning was eventually sent. And the key question to me that David asked was, how long is someone normally kept on a suicide risk watch? She said, 48 to 72 hours. We're talking here with Bradley Manning of 9 months in Quantico. Inexcusable. As soon as Bradley Manning was sent to Leavenworth, he was immediately put in general population. Immediately. So it just tells you something about how he was treated at Quantico. But to me, the most moving thing was after lunch. We go to lunch, and we have to rush lunch. We eat at a Subway or something nearby, those of us that can eat, because I didn't have to take notes like the journalists who were writing away and using their computers for the first time to tweet people. But we come back into the courtroom, and we're all sitting there, and the courtroom can't hold 40 people. And David Coombs says, "Bradley Manning, will you take the stand?" Well, there was dead silence in the room. It was a moment we'd all been expecting at some point, but didn't know when it would happen. And there you see Bradley Manning looking really, really well. I mean, in a dress blue uniform, a white shirt and a tie, glasses, and he walks up and he takes the witness stand. And David starts off by saying, "I know you're probably a little nervous to start with. I'll start slowly. But let me just say something. The Bradley Manning I saw that day was not the Bradley Manning you read about in your newspapers. It's not the Bradley Manning whose character has been assassinated by the so-called legitimate media. It's not the Bradley Manning who people think is a flake. It was something else altogether." The first thing I would say, it was the most dignified testimony I've heard. Considering what Bradley Manning has lived through, he was incredibly dignified. He was incredibly smart, incredibly self-aware, understood where he was, what was happening to him, and did his best in a legal way to get out from under what was called by the UN Rapporteur on Torture cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, and possibly amounting to torture. David brought Bradley through a phase of his life that I didn't know at all in terms of his detention. He talked about what happened shortly after Bradley Manning was arrested in Iraq and taken to Kuwait. And it was stunning when you heard it. Bradley Manning said, "I was taken to Kuwait and I was put into cages, into a cage. The cage was 8 by 8 by 8. It was like an animal cage. And it was in a tent. And then when he's in that cage, what happens? He gets in and out on one occasion when he's let out into a different brig, but in the end, he winds up spending almost 2 months in what he described as an animal cage. What time do you think he gets waken up? He gets waken up at 11 p.m. in the evening. What time does he get to go to sleep? 1 p.m. in the afternoon. Reminds me of some of our clients at Guantanamo. As Bradley said about that experience in the cage, nights became days, and days became nights. I started to deteriorate. It was very draining. It was insular for someone like me who was a very social person. I was falling apart. My world, which had been a world of interest in many issues, from the Gulf oil spill to reading Richard Dawkins, my world had shrunk to the cage. And then he said to himself, "I'm going to die in this cage." And he remained like that till the end of July in Kuwait. Then, after that, he was sent to Quantico. When he was put on the plane, he didn't know where he was going. He thought he might even be sent to Guantanamo. And then there were two very amazing moments, and I know the time is short, so I want to just say this quickly. There was one when David Coombs had Bradley Manning get off the witness stand and actually, with a ruler, showed the size of the cell he was in Quantico, 8 by 6. He showed on one wall where the bed was or rack, on another wall where the toilet was beneath the washing bowl, and it was a cage that had, lace-like squares in front of it, and across a guard sat, and then there was an observation booth. And the light was on 24 hours a day in this cage that Bradley Manning was in. And Bradley Manning walks on the floor, he takes off his jacket, puts on what's called a suicide smock. The best way to describe it is a long straitjacket in which your arms are not actually bound, but they're free. And one night, of course, Bradley said his arms got stuck in it, and they had to rescue him to get out. He also, the suicide blanket he showed us, and other things on the floor. Then Bradley talked about what happened during the day and the night. During the night, he had a face sleeping the light. If he turned away to go to sleep, they came in and they woke him up and forced him to face the light. During the day, he had to stand in his cell all the time, except he could sit on the bunk as long as his feet were on the ground. He couldn't lean against anything, 8, 10, 12 hours a day. He was supposedly on duty. And then we saw a video. The video was heartbreaking. The video showed Bradley Manning being forced to take off his clothes. He's on one side of the cage, put them in one of those mail slots with a tray, and the guards take them on the other side. And that night, of course, at the count, Bradley Manning was naked. And from then on, during the day, all he had was his briefs, and at night, he was naked and had to sleep under this rough blanket. When I think about these things, I think about what happened to our Guantanamo detainees and what are called the Rumsfeld techniques. Bright light, stress positions, no clothing, solitary. Because he wasn't solitary. There were no prisoners on either side of him. Then, of course, after this, after 9 months in Quantico, no reason for this, he finally gets sent to Leavenworth and put into general population. It was, for me, watching it, the most devastating day I've spent in a courtroom. I was in tears from beginning to end, watching this young man having faced really some of the worst, most punitive punishment by our government, and yet be able to testify with incredible, incredible dignity. There's a reason we are here. There's a reason we are here supporting Bradley Manning. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael Ratner. And now the man of the hour, David Coombs, Bradley Manning's defense attorney. This is his first public presentation. He's a lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserves. He's done 12 years of active duty. He's been practicing and teaching criminal law for 15 years, and he's highly respected by his peers and colleagues. As I said, this is the first public presentation that David Coombs is making, and we'll be taking a few questions from the press, not from the audience, but from the press after his presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome David Coombs.
Thank you. Well, I really appreciate the turnout here, and especially the turnout by the press. Thank you for that. As many of you know, I have not participated in any public events before today. I also avoid any interviews with the media. And it was and still is my belief that Bradley Manning deserves an attorney that is focused on what is happening in the courtroom and only what is happening in the courtroom. And that is why I have chosen not to do media interviews at this point. But today, however, marks a milestone, and it was actually supposed to be an ending point, really, to the motions hearings that we were going through. And it would mark the end of the motions phase, working our way into the trial phase. And the motion that we were doing, and unfortunately still are, is the unlawful pretrial punishment motion. And it's taken longer than expected, but I must tell you, I'm not really that disappointed by that. I'm enjoying my opportunity to cross-examine those who had Bradley Manning in those conditions for 9 months. As I take an opportunity, though, to reflect on the last 2 years, I think it's fitting that we're here today at the end of the motion phase with a motion that really brought the world's attention to this case, and that was how Bradley Manning was being treated. Brad's treatment at Quantico will forever be etched, I believe, in our nation's history as a disgraceful moment in time. Not only was it stupid and counterproductive, it was criminal. An entire group of individuals who I no doubt are honorable men and women chose to turn a blind eye to how Bradley was being treated. Those who could affect change did not. They were more concerned about how the attention might be put on them if something happened to Brad, as opposed to what was their conduct doing to Brad. But it turns out those same people cared about something more. And what they turned out to care about more was the media impact. And for that, I must thank each and every one of you here today. I must thank each and every one who is listening or watching, because without you, change would not have happened. Your actions resulted in Brad being moved from Quantico to Fort Leavenworth. Make no mistake about that. And with your actions, the draconian conditions that he lived under for 9 months came to an end. The magical waters of Fort Leavenworth apparently healed him, and he was no longer required to live in the conditions that he was in. Now, we all know Brad cannot be here tonight, but he knows tonight is happening. And he wanted me to personally thank each and every one of you. Thank you for taking the time to write to him, for signing petitions, for attending marches, rallies, and other public events. Thank you for writing to the military and to our government, complaining about his conditions. Thank you for donating to his legal defense, for volunteering at Courage to Resist and the Bradley Manning Support Network. But most of all, he wanted me to thank you for caring about him. The battle that we have waged for the last 2 years could not have been fought without your help. And it has been a hard fight so far. We are currently at over 450 appellate exhibits in this case, and that amounts to just over 20,000 pages of written motions and attachments. I am confident by the time this case comes to a conclusion, the record of trial will be the longest record of trial in our military's history. And that record will reflect one thing, that we fought at every turn, at every opportunity, and we fought to ensure that Brad received a fair trial. Now, my office website can keep track of a few things, and I want to share some numbers with you that I am personally, happy to see. And that is over 764,000 people to date have gone and read at least something about Brad on my webpage. We've received over 72,000 pieces of mail for Brad since his beginning in confinement. Over 14,000 individuals have donated to either Courage to Resist or the Bradley Manning Defense Fund, and 754 supporters have donated directly to his legal defense fund managed by my office. And today, I want to take the opportunity to thank you. Thank you for getting involved. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy life, not only to be here today and to listen to what I'm saying, but thank you for caring about Brad. Thank you. When I'm in the courtroom, I stand up and I look to my right, and I see the United States government. The United States government with all of its resources, all of its personnel. I see them standing against me and Brad. And I have to admit to you, that can be rather intimidating. And I was intimidated, especially when the President of the United States says, your client broke the law. Especially when Congress members say, your client deserves the death penalty. I want to tell you, though, today, as I stand here, I'm no longer intimidated. I am not intimidated because when I stand up, I know I'm not standing alone. I know I'm not alone because I turn around and I see the support behind me. I see members here today in the audience that are there every time we have a court hearing. I see what I'm going to affectionately call the Truth Battalion. Those who wear nothing but they wear other things, but they wear a black shirt. It has the word truth on it. And they're behind me. And when I look there, I know that I also have unlimited personnel and unlimited resources. But perhaps the best evidence for me that I am not standing alone when I stand for Brad is a website called IamBradleyManning.org. I personally have to tell you, I go to this site at least once a day. I go to the site when I need to recharge my batteries after working a long day on the case, and I just peruse the photographs. People with a simple statement in front of their face. I am Bradley Manning. It's amazing the power of those simple words. What those words mean to each individual, I do not know. But I want to take a moment to share with you what that may mean to Brad. During our countless conversations, I had an opportunity to talk to him about his future. And I said, Brad, what do you want to do when this eventually comes to an end? And he told me that his dream would be to go to college, to get a degree. And as a young man, at that time he was 23, that makes sense. We all know that college degrees are pretty much the ticket to a productive future. So I asked Brad, well, with that degree, what do you plan on doing? And he said, I want to go into public service. And I asked him what he meant by that. He said, I want to join some sort of campaign group, go into public service, and perhaps one day run for public office. And I asked Brad, why would he want to do that? And he said, I want to make a difference. I want to make a difference in this world. I can tell you that standing here today, I hope that someday soon Brad can go to college. I hope someday soon he can, in fact, go into public service. But I am confident, as I stand here today, that Brad doesn't have to worry about making a difference in this world. He has made a difference. Last Tuesday, the President of the United States signed into law the Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act. As President Obama was signing this bill into law, Brad and I were in a courtroom for the start of his unlawful pretrial punishment motion. How can you reconcile the two? I don't know the answer to that question. One of our nation's most famous whistleblowers, Daniel Ellsberg, has on multiple occasions spoken out for Brad. History has been the ultimate judge of his courage and sacrifice. History has judged him well. I hope that history will judge Private First Class Bradley Manning in a similar light. I thank you for coming here today, and I thank you for listening to me.
We have some questions from the press.
Now, I'm not promising answers to any of these.
And I'm sure if members of the media have some more questions, or if you didn't get your question on an index card, you can, and it'll be passed to the front. The first one is a two-part question. In your opinion, what sort of person is Bradley Manning, and what is his state of mind?
Well, I think Bradley is probably one of the more intelligent people I've ever met. Brad has the ability, I think, to talk about a wide range of topics. He's a young man, obviously, though, and with that, he has limited experiences. But Brad does a lot of things really kind of from the heart. He tends to care a lot about people, and so his conduct and his actions are usually driven by that. As far as his mental state or how he is being, I guess, of a mind today, I can tell you that he is very excited about having his case go forward in the process now. It's been a long time. And he's also, at this point, very encouraged by the way the proceedings are going. I think he feels good about his defense. At least I hope he does. And at this point, I believe he's confident that things will hopefully turn out okay for him.
What can ordinary citizens do to help Bradley Manning?
Well, I think the biggest thing is to make sure that this case doesn't get lost in the minutia of everything else going on in this world. It is by far the most important military case, but it's a case that has significance for all of us. Because in this country, in the country that I am proud to serve in the United States Army Reserve now, we live in a country that is built on freedom of speech, live in a country that's built on government accountability, and informed citizens. So I think at this point, the biggest thing you can do is stay involved, to stay informed, and to make sure those that you've elected into public office understand your views.
Have you perceived any difference in the way he's being treated in court as time goes on?
I have not. I mean, I think Bradley is treated professionally in court. A military court-martial is in my opinion, the best courtroom you can go into. I practice both in state and federal. And I know anyone who doesn't have experience with the military justice system may view it with a suspicious eye. But from my perspective, it is by far the best courtroom for Bradley to be in.
How do your experiences in the military and in civilian life inform how you approach courts-martial generally, and this case specifically?
That actually is a good follow-up to what I was just saying. A lot of people would look at the military justice system and say, this seems to be very foreign to me. You have a officer and enlisted type panel, if you go with a panel, that's selected by the person who's convened the court-martial. You have a military judge that is in the military, and there's some suspicion that that person may be subject to some influence. And so when you look at it from the outside, you could see and perhaps think that the system is built to obtain a certain outcome. I can tell you with confidence, again, having practiced both in state and federal and in military practice, that a court-martial is by far the fairest justice system that I've ever practiced in. And that may sound confusing. I actually get some looks of, I don't know about that. But let me tell you why. Military judges are not just picked out at random, they're not voted in. A military judge is somebody who has done, in most instances, both acted as a prosecutor and as a defense counsel for a period of time, has seen both sides. Also, that person usually has taken on the role of a chief of military justice, which would be the equivalent of a DA, or a senior defense counsel. And so from that perspective, you have a lot of experience. Once the judge becomes a judge, usually that person is a lieutenant colonel or a colonel. People who go that route are not interested in becoming generals. And so you've kind of tapped out at the top of where you would want to be. So there is no influence issue. And you have somebody there that is truly experienced, who truly understands the law. And from my perspective, I would take a judge who knows the law and is very experienced over many of the judges I practiced in state and federal. And then from a panel standpoint, if you go with a panel, almost everybody in the military, once they have obtained a certain rank, has some sort of college degree. And I think that in and of itself kind of speaks volumes about the person's ability to at least have an open mind on certain topics. And so we normally refer to military panels as blue ribbon panels. They represent, in many cases, individuals with at least a bachelor's, if not a master's or a doctorate degree. And so that may be surprising to some, but again, the panels that I've practiced in front of have always been fair panels. I might not have agreed with their outcome, but I do believe they took their job seriously. With regards to state juries I practiced in front of, it's not always the case that you get an open-minded jury. So again, for those who look to this and say, I wish you were in some other venue, I can tell you that Bradley's in the best venue possible for him.
Okay, this is sort of related to that question. How do you find that outsiders of either military service or civilian life generally perceive the other?
Well, I think I might have answered that question. I can tell you that if you do, in fact, look at the rights, and this is more when I taught military law to non-military attorneys, we would compare the various rights that you have in a state or a federal court against the rights that you have in a military court. And in every instance, the military court rights exceed that you would have as a normal citizen in state or federal court. So I think this is an issue in which a lot of times the suspicion, once you're informed, doesn't bear out. You start to believe that, this is a very fair system. The suspicion, I think, though, of the military justice system is because in some regards it's foreign, obviously. But never forget that the military is made up of basically our sons and daughters, husbands, wives, fathers and mothers, just like yourself. And it is in my mind, it's not a perfect system, but it is one of the the best systems that I've had the opportunity to practice in front of.
This may be the same kind of question. You see what you think. What do you take with you most from your military service and your time in civilian life?
I think military service, I can tell you a little background story about me. I was on active duty as a major. I just went through a course that would have ultimately put me on the track of lieutenant colonel and then taking the bench as a military judge. And then I met my lovely wife, who we met at a new law professors conference, not the kind of a geeky way of meeting your spouse. But we met there, and she changed my priorities. And she's a law professor, so at least in our family, she is the smartest one, and I know that. And so what we ultimately decided was I would hitch my cart to her star. And so that's what I did, and that's why I got out of the military, at least from the active duty standpoint. And when I got out, it was probably one of the worst times you could go out on the job market, and so I couldn't find a job. Even though I got towards the last rounds of job interviews, I was never selected. I was in an area where I didn't know people, and that's pretty much how you could find a job, by being known. So I decided to hang out my own shingle and go into state and federal practice, and then ultimately start my military practice. And I'll tell you that what I take to the military practice and what I think helps serve me well and my clients is a lot of the people that I see in the military are former students of mine when I taught, or they've come up through the ranks with me, and I know them. And so, at least in that system, you have the ability to sit down at a table with somebody and have a little bit of experience about them and know them and be able to talk to them and hopefully obtain positive outcomes for clients. But for me now, going into this case, obviously this has been a 2-year in the making case. And the people that I'm working against some of them are former students. The relationships that we have, obviously in this case, are adversarial, but I can tell that, and you see it in the courtroom, they're working hard for their side. And they believe in what they're doing. I think what I bring most into this situation is I have a familiarity with the system and the terminology. If anyone sits in the courtroom, you hear a lot of acronyms. You hear a lot of phrases that if you weren't a military attorney, that would be very difficult to even follow the conversation, let alone represent your client in a zealous manner. So I think that's the experience I bring is not only being known, but also just being familiar with the system.
Can you explain what's going on with the change of dates? His trial is now changed from starting on February 4th to March 16th. Why is that?
Yeah, the trial date has moved a couple times to the right, and a lot of times that is due to motions that are being argued. Some of the motions are unplanned, and they become issues only when we see, a particular piece of evidence. In this instance, we've got some issues that we're litigating that if the defense receives a particular ruling will require a delay in the proceedings of about 2 weeks. If we don't receive that ruling, then the calendar will move back to the left a couple of weeks. So in this instance, it's all driven really by a few of the motions, although as I started my speech and my remarks here today, we're nearing the end of the motions phase, and we really are transferring towards the trial phase at this point.
One of the charges is aiding the enemy. How great a threat do you think that charge is to the press and to whistleblowers in the age of the Internet?
Yeah, I'll remove this from this case. So I will just say that this is why I think it is a very important case for everybody, because when you look at the offense of aiding the enemy and take it out of this case and just simply say, if you can possibly aid the enemy by giving information to the press with no intent that that information land in the hands of the enemy, and by that mere action alone you can be found to have aided the enemy, that's a scary proposition. Right there, that would silence a lot of critics of our government, and that's what makes our government great, in that we foster that criticism. And oftentimes, when it's deserved, we make changes. So this is a very serious offense, not only for my client, but I think for anybody in America to be paying attention to what it means to aid the enemy. So again, I think it's something that hopefully means something more than just giving information to the press.
Bradley Manning stated last week that he didn't want his case tried in the press. Does he and do you feel the public and press have accurately represented what's happened?
Well, I'll just answer that from my perspective. And as I said to begin with, this public appearance is the exception for me. I believe that trying the case in the press is not the way to do representation of a client. And Brad, at least from what he testified in the open hearing, didn't want his case to be tried in the press either. Because that was his wishes early on, but also because my perspective is you shouldn't try your case in the press. I respected his wishes, and I didn't grant interviews. And even after this day, I won't be granting interviews. And the reason why, again, is because your focus has to be on your client and not on, basically putting out facts to spin something your way in the press when that doesn't achieve anything in the courtroom. When you're in the courtroom, that's what matters. What happens there matters. In the press, as I said here today, what really matters is you, the public, being involved and being informed. And the press can do wonderful things. That's why I'm happy to see them here today. And that's what really resulted in Brad being moved, in my opinion, from Quantico to Fort Leavenworth.
Are you and your client able to communicate freely on a privileged basis?
Yes, Brad and I speak at least once a week, if not more. And we see each other quite often as well. Our communications are always privileged. They're never subject to any sort of recording or being monitored by anyone. And so because of that, I act basically as kind of the conduit for Brad, giving him information and helping him stay in touch and informed. So those communications are not subject to monitoring.
Final question, although I think you've pretty much covered this. Do you feel the judge has so far been fair to your client, and does Bradley Manning feel that way as well?
Well, yeah, okay. I can't, that's a loaded question there, but I will say, I won't say that. What I would say is this, that when I look up to the bench and I see a judge that knows the law, that is always prepared, that seems to be 2 steps ahead of the counsel, then I'm comforted by that. And for me, at least, that makes me work harder. That makes me fear being in the courtroom and not being prepared. And so in this case, I would say we have a judge that's exactly like that. So if to the extent that Michael saw some good advocacy in the courtroom, I can tell you that was because I would not want to see the judge look at me in a way that says, how dare you come into my courtroom and not be prepared? And so here, I'm very happy with the judge that we have and her knowledge and expertise.
Okay. That's the end of the questions for David Coombs. Thank you. Let's say thank you to David Coombs. I just want to give out the web address again. David Coombs already did that, but it's important in this David versus Goliath battle that you know where you can go to help support Bradley Manning. Go to bradleymanning.org and get involved there. Again, that's bradleymanning.org. We're also live streaming this there as well and carrying it on Pacifica and live on C-SPAN. We're going to break now, and I'll just tell you that in the second half of the program, for those of you who are remaining here, it's kind of a whistleblower extravaganza. In the second half of the program, we'll be hearing Jesselyn Radak and Marcia Coleman Adebayo, and also Kevin Zeese, and we'll be telling you more about how you can contribute financially. So see you in the second half.